Picking the right gun oil isn't just about cleaning, lubrication, penetration, and preservation. It must be safe. For metal and wood, yes, but also leather, rubber, and your own skin. It should never cake up over time, leaving you both protected and always ready. The right gun oil does all of these things and more. It takes a chore and turns it into a pleasure. Ballistol and Primer, preserving history together.
Hello class! For those new auditors amongst us, I will be your professor for today. My name is Ernst Grenacher. It's written on the board and spelled a bit different than how it sounds. You can blame the Welsh. Today we'll be exploring a rather famous World War II era bolt-action service rifle, strangely renowned for its advanced features despite being from a neutral nation. I am of course talking about the Swiss Karabiner 31. This universal short rifle uses a straight pull cock on open action. Its overall length is 43 1/2 of an inch, or about 111 centimeters. Weight is right at 8.8 pounds, that would make for 4 kilos. Its double stacked box magazine is detachable, though this was done more for cleaning and unloading. That's because it was primarily fed with a 6-round cardboard charger. The cartridge is the same 7.5 by 55mm GP11 from the previous service rifle. Now, while our long arm today is famous for its precision engineering and reliability, I'd like to do my best to add just one little extra drop to the pool of common knowledge around this particular gun. Just like the beloved Lee series of rifles, the K31 actually sits at the end of a fairly long development cycle, which includes several stops along the way. While we've covered much of this before in our lectures on the previous Gewehre 1889 and Gewehre 1911, I think it's worth revisiting briefly today. Now, to accomplish this, I've brought along a much older Swiss rifle. That would be, the Vetterli. What I really want to show you is its bolt, however. So, come on around and let's take a quick look. I don't want to go into too much detail on this rifle today, but it does have a tubular loading magazine that uses an elevator to feed to the bolt. That's critical because it explains, at least to some degree, why our bolt is so long. It must actually pass through the elevator in order to take it into battery, and then as we turn it in place, the elevator drops out of the way, the bolt's free to rotate into battery, and then we're locked up and ready to fire. Now, the actual lockup is also fairly unique in that we have not one, but 2 symmetrical rear locking lugs. This was very advanced for its day. They're on a collar that is integral to the bolt handle that sits behind the actual bolt body and is supported by this nice rib right there that's been milled into the bolt body. But if you take a look, the base of our cartridge is pretty much my fist away from our locking lugs. Yes, part of that is the aforementioned elevator, and the other part is just black powder fouling in general. There's a lot of gack that comes along with that, and on a repeating rifle, well, you don't want it jamming up from it, so leaving these all the way at the rear of the receiver where they can dump out the back without dumping it into the magazine is a fairly good idea. Now, while the repeating Vetterli was impressively far ahead of the curve, it did suffer from limited range and power. Its cartridge used an advanced metallic case, but lacked for ballistic advantage. This is actually rather strange, because Switzerland was also home to Eduard Rubin, a man we might call the father of the modern bullet. Rubin and his colleagues were proponents of the small-bore, high-velocity bullet. His work led to the lead core-jacketed bullets, which could withstand the ever-increasing muzzle velocity while delivering good terminal performance. In an attempt to adopt just such a cartridge, the Swiss Rifle Commission often used various modifications of this otherwise advanced Vetterli rifle to test their ammunition. It's no wonder that their next service rifle would also actually be heavily influenced by the prior Vetterli. Inventor Rudolf Schmidt had come over to arms design in his later 20s thanks to his love of rifle shooting. Schmidt was an extensive researcher and publisher of small arms technology. At least one of his original volumes is available to our students through our digital library, by the way. These are beautiful works and frankly quite informative. Now, Rudolf Schmidt became the director of the then new Swiss Arsenal Waffenfabrik Bern in 1875. In time, he and his engineers would develop a straight pull action that could be paired with the existing Vetterli bolt body, more or less. They also ditched the unbalanced tubular magazine in favor of a vertical box. This eventually led to the Swiss adoption of the Gewehr 1889, a 7.5mm small-bore repeating rifle that was adopted at the emergence of smokeless powder, while technically designed for black powder. Now, we've already had a lesson on that particular topic. Critically, the new Swiss rifle might have borrowed a bit too much from the Vetterli, and was perhaps too considerate of the fouling that would have been associated with compressed black powder, a concern which all but evaporated even as the rifle was being adopted. You know what? Let me go ahead and show you that with the help of yet another rifle, this of course being the Swiss 1889 itself. We've done a whole lesson on this big old rifle before, so I don't want to go into too much detail. However, note the fact that it is, well, extremely long. I mean, whoo-hoo. That's fine for an infantry rifle of its day, but of course, some of the reason it has to be so long is just to provide enough barrel to go along with a fairly massive receiver. Now, coming from the tube-loaded Vetterli rifle, in a tube loader, when you stack up cartridges forward, you end up with this weight imbalance, and as you shoot, it switches back. But with a vertical box magazine, you have the same balance point the whole time, and it's slightly better to move that balance point towards the firing hand, which would be right-handed at that time, which was dictated by every military that I know of. If you have a gap like this, again, pretty much the width of my palm, that is some lost chance of having a good rear balance point to the rifle. You're putting much more of it up on the support hand. And also, if you're trying to stay in cover or behind anything really, that means that you either have to hang your magazine over or you have to pull the whole rifle back, which means that you're now teetering up here instead of, well, actually right where the magazine is for most other guns. So there's some downsides there. So the reason for this gap, by the way, is because of the excessive length of this whole receiver and bolt. The bolt being why the receiver is so long. So let's go ahead and take that out. I'll just pull it open and then pull down on this lever, and oh boy. Now this is obviously a more advanced straight pull design, but what the heck has happened here? We have locking lug, and then there's that palm again, all this extra length. Well, looking at it in hindsight, it appears that they just took the Vetterli bolt body, which is, you know, solid tube, overhead extractor, a big old puffed up collar to meet what is actually really the wraparound bolt shroud over here. Yeah, same thing. Only instead of our locking lugs being right there at the front of it with a manual bolt handle, they said, well, hold on, we'll take all this and we'll marry it to a system that causes the lugs to rotate on their own by just sort of driving everything this way and adding on to the whole system until it works. This is almost unnecessary. I mean, yes, black powder fouling is a concern, and putting them as far away from the chamber as possible does help with that fouling, but you went for a lot of years with locking lugs all the way up here, and we'll see them return to this position fairly soon. That means that this is ultimately much longer than your previous system. I mean, the back of the receiver would be here versus here. Oh boy. As a matter of fact, even some of the components that were externalized on this bolt were internalized on this one, which means we've really stretched out that receiver length. This is pretty wild. While this was a minor problem on the rifle, it was extremely difficult for a carbine. Any length acceptable for service resulted in an unacceptable barrel length for the available ammunition. This would ultimately force Switzerland to adopt a variation of the Austrian Mannlicher, another straight pull but with an entirely different action. Once again, we have covered this particular rifle before. Now sadly, I don't have an 1893 here today, but I do have something that works just about the same in terms of the bolt. So let me go ahead and sit this bad back down. And from my mysterious stash, I'll go ahead and pull out our next example. Come on up and take a look. Now, right from the start, take note. This is the magazine well at the back of the clip ejection port for the Mannlicher, which means it's right up against our trigger guard. That's nice. Now, in the Swiss system, they didn't use all this. They had a detachable box magazine, which we're going to see again soon, but you get the idea. This is a much shorter overall action and better balance point, and you can really see it in the length of this bolt. By the way, this bolt is currently in the out of battery position as if we had retracted it out of the gun. You know what, let's go ahead and compare it to the Swiss. I've aligned these two at their rear receiver point, back of the receiver, back of the receiver. So a little bit more of this seems to be externalized, but it's really just the width of this bolt handle, right? Then we look forward, and what do you see? All of that. And it gets worse because, again, this is in its position as if it were out of action. If we actually had the gun in a firing position, try not to pinch myself here, it would be locked into battery like this. If we lock this into battery, it's going to try to disassemble itself, but all you need to know is that this rod will come forward and therefore flush up to this line here anyway. It doesn't actually change this dimension all the way to here versus this dimension all the way to there. That is a huge difference. The only problem, of course, is that it comes at the expense and complication of designing this bolt, in which the entire rotational mechanism is enshrouded inside of here, and there's obviously some complicated cuts going inside of this bolt shroud and on the bolt body itself. We have a whole lesson on these Mannlichers and the Swiss version thereof, so make sure you check those out if you'd like to know more details about how they managed to accomplish exactly this act. I mean, even the extractor is fitted down into this groove, whereas this guy's out in the wind. I mean, this is much more compact. Unfortunately, the Mannlicher carbines never seemed to satisfy the Swiss Armed Forces. With all the internal surface interaction, it could come up fairly easily, and its very nature was a bit herky-jerky. This would spawn a number of attempts to refine the Mannlicher bolt into something more usable, or even hybridize it with other rifles. It's a fascinating study in and of itself, but as far as I can tell, did not lead directly to our rifle today, other than the simple desire to shorten up that bolt and thereby the receiver itself. A slight improvement was made to the rifle in 1896. The locking lugs were now moved forward towards the midpoint of the entire bolt. This increased the strength of the gun and shaved 2 centimeters off the action length. This might not seem like much, but it paved the way for an even better cartridge some years later. A pair of carbines, sort of like the length of that old 1893, would follow. Now, attempting to avoid the complaints and expense of the different Mannlicher system, they opted to keep the Schmidt. The model 1900 for the artillery and the 1905 for the cavalry. The former managed a 23-inch barrel, which drove it into the range of a short rifle, something that would become more common in just a few years' time. The cavalry, however, was snugged down to 21.7 inches in an attempt to keep the overall length under control. By 1907, Rubin's efforts had yielded a Spitzer pointed bullet. Later adopted in 1911, this GP11 cartridge was a high-speed smokeless 7.5mm. At the same time, an improved version of the previous 1896 rifle was adopted. Now, the magazine capacity was shrunk from 12 rounds to just 6. This better balanced the rifle and made it more useful in the prone position, as well as preventing damage to the magazines when, well, hauled all up and down the mountainside. Testing revealed it had almost no effect on the overall fire rate, since 2 charges had to be used in either case. Now, while all this was going on, another round of carbine development was underway. This time the emphasis was on the possibility of having just one service carbine for everyone. This would, however, require the longer barrel to better utilize the Spitzer cartridge, so cavalry wouldn't get their little tiny carbine. You go too short and it's not suitable for line infantry or long-range accuracy. And on that point, there was even some consideration towards dropping the long rifle entirely. Testing was showing that for general military purposes, the artillery carbine short rifle, whatever you want to call it, its accuracy was enough. Small problem, Switzerland had fostered a huge sporting marksman community as a means of providing trained shooters for less cost than a larger nation. These marksmen demanded a service rifle capable of not just warfare shooting, but also fit for advancing civilian shooting. Their repeated justification was Switzerland's mountainous border, which meant ranged fire over 1,500 meters may be needed in warfare. Basically, anything selected had to be both rugged and insanely precise, which of course made the rifle rather heavy. Now that heaviness was always a complaint, both militarily and on the civilian side, so how about we just make a shorter rifle? No, because that might shave a fraction of an inch off of my all-time high score. I gotta keep that muzzle velocity screaming fast. So, at least for now, all the government could do was reduce the number of service arms to just 2 for wide issue, with the new one and only carbine adopted in 1913 and sitting alongside the service rifle. Even so, the same argument kept playing out for some years to come. The question of a truly universal short rifle was likely both aided and delayed by the First World War. Despite being a neutral power, Switzerland maintained this position by threat of force. So, during the Great War, their armed forces were expanded and kept at various states of readiness, well beyond their peacetime numbers. Production of rifles was also accelerated. This would, post-war, make for some surplus that might actually stall the introduction of a new design. However, following experiences in the war, many turned to the successes of Britain and the United States universal short rifles. These had been more than adequate for then modern warfare. Not only did they have enough precision at range, they were handier and more mobile. They were also more compatible with a combined arms strategy, let alone the emerging mechanization. Now, while it's beyond our scope today, this was also a time in which Switzerland was working through the notion of fielding an auto-loading rifle. This had been a topic of consideration since the turn of the century, but repeatedly proved to be either too unreliable or too expensive to produce, or frankly both. Though at least one Swiss-made automatic did serve in that Great War. Actually, even with Swiss aviation, though in very small numbers. I'll go ahead and wrap the topic of the autoloader here though, as it was just too expensive to pursue. So, what could be done about the long rifle situation? Well, that matter would be resolved at the Federal Arms Factory Waffenfabrik Bern. This was a government-run arms factory founded in 1875, the same that was being run by Rudolf Schmidt. It was responsible for development and production of arms for the Swiss Army. Its engineers and officers were also, of course, heavily involved in the selection of such arms. For our story today, this was done under the leadership of one Adolf Führer. Johann Adolf Führer Kagi by birth, though in service this name was shrunk down to something more manageable. Born in Zurich in 1873, Führer enlisted in the Swiss Army, joining the technical department of the War Material Administration in 1904. His 1918 prototype submachine gun was a sort of Swiss Viller Perosa, a Luger-derived pistol-caliber aviation-mounted machine gun. In 1919, he would double it, really making a Luger-Viller Perosa. Some consider him the father of the assault rifle thanks to his 1921 introduction of a select-fire intermediate cartridge rifle. Again, toggle-locked. Some of this work would actually carry over to his actually adopted 1925 light machine gun, though this was chambered for the full-power GP11 cartridge. This LMG would actually take pressure off the desire to adopt an auto-loading rifle for general service. Now, rewinding to 1921, then Lieutenant Adolf Führer was appointed director of Waffenfabrik Bern. I believe this may have bumped him up to a lieutenant colonel as well. There he would oversee a series of changes that leads us to our gun today. Führer often gets credit for the actual changes to the rifle directly, though I have some doubts about just how much was directly from him, as the K31 is not a toggle-locked action like everything else he made. In the spring of 1924, a series of 10 carbines were constructed with heavy barrels. This had been a suggestion from one Colonel Otter. The hope was that the heavy barrel carbines could match the precision and accuracy of the long service rifles. While weight savings would be minor, they would at least be less clumsy to carry around. Interestingly, they were underslung, more of a short rifle than a carbine. These were tested in 1925 and 1926 and actually worked out well. A further 100 were produced in the spring of 1928. The muzzle end of the barrel was turned down in order to accept a bayonet. Again, initial testing went well. These were then modified to be side-slung, with another 100 produced and added in for issue to field trials. These were used into 1929 and then returned for evaluation. Now, fun fact, these 200-odd Trials carbines were stored as a reserve, and in 1938, 60 would be sent to the Swiss Guard in Rome, and 140 to the Border Guards much later in 1959. So conceptually, a heavy barrel short rifle could fulfill all the Swiss Army needs, but while they were considering a new shoulder arm, why not clean up that nasty receiver length and poor balance issue? Well, starting in 1929, a series of Trials carbines began to be produced for testing. These are credited, again, to Adolf Fuhrer and feature a dramatically reduced bolt and therefore receiver length. Now, these were sighted up to 2,000 meters. Over the course of the next year, a 1Z-2Z trickle turned into 21 test carbines, which were shot and assessed at Thun and Wallenstad shooting school. While externally this looks a lot like our rifle today, there are numerous minor differences, especially in construction. As this series progressed, more changes were made both to improve the rifle for the service and to ease and speed manufacture. Most of this work was carried out in 1931. Frankly, almost all of the major design decisions were already made in the spring of 31. It was just tweaking from there. This meant trialing a multi-piece receiver, some variations of heavy barrels and sights, small changes in the trigger guard, various diameter firing pins, and adjusting the shape and construction method of the magazine and follower. Batches of trial carbines were, the largest of which I believe was 100 units, were sent to the shooting schools, issued to various recruits, cavalry testing, and some straight along for ammunition testing. The various reports were gathered in December of 1931 for a final decision. During this discussion, the rear sight was actually reduced to just 1,500 meters. By January of 1932, the Federal Council was confident in the new design, declaring it as ordnance under the name Karabiner 31, for its development in the previous year. The new rifle didn't just solve problems with length and weight, or just make manufacture cheaper and easier. The old models suffered dangerous failures when they had simple bore obstructions. The new model was much stronger locking. Case failures were reduced to almost nothing from the prior models. The forward barrel sleeve was deleted. The trigger mechanism was overhauled completely, making for an incredibly consistent two-stage trigger pull. This was paired with a shorter and faster firing pin travel. This aided accuracy. Now, all this only laid the groundwork for production, meaning Waffenfabrik Bern could start to move towards serial manufacture pending budget approvals. In April, 100 more carbines were produced for testing, with fresh recruits in 1932 and 1933 receiving them. Sig and Neuhausen was asked for proposals for a new bayonet. Nothing seems to have come from it, as the model 1918 bayonet was retained. This is a double-edged knife style with a blade just shy of 12 inches long. Actual adoption of the new model came in May of 1933 with a resolution of the Federal Assembly. Finally, Switzerland had a single service rifle for all of its units. So, what exactly did they get? Well, I think you guys know, so let's get a closer look. We finally have our K31. Let's get a nice look at a not so long rifle. Let's go ahead and start our tour up at the front. We have a stacking hook in order to make our rifle teepee. 3 to a teepee keeps everything out of the mud, especially that muzzle. You don't want a bore obstruction. We have a beautiful front sight protector, which we'll look at in just a second. If you notice, the barrel's been turned down right here at the end of the muzzle because it wants to fit the bayonet, which also locks into the slug here. This is our screw for clamp style front band. If I flip that over, you'll be able to see the hinge and just the other side of that front sight, which is pressed on and pinned. And then if we flip this up, you should be able to see that dovetail front sight for armorer level adjustment. That means that you can get pretty fine on adjusting these to the soldier's best point of 0, but to be honest with you, this is not something you're going to do individually. It takes a good bit of banging, and they'd probably discourage you from doing it. As a matter of fact, I think most of these are gone ahead and dinged into position. Traveling further down, we have the mid band, which is both screwed across and then held by a spring on the underside, and has a little rotating swivel. If we look at the whole forestock, you'll note that it is fully stocked. I mean, only this much of the barrel is sticking out from a full handguard and full lower stock. Lots of grasping room for bayonets and prevention of heat mirage, things like that. If we bring her down, The rear sight has been moved rearward from previous rifles. It's sitting right over the chamber, right in front of the receiver. That's likely to get the maximum possible sight radius out of the rifle. Oh, by the way, there's our grasping grooves right there in the wood, and a little protection for the back of the handguard. Let's flip this guy up and take note of 1 to 1,500 meters of adjustment on a tangent V. Press the button and go. And yeah, that's how we adjust for height. Carried over from the previous carbines, we have some rear sight protectors that keep us from chipping up our V-notch. While we're in this position, take note of the beautiful Swiss crest right on top of the receiver. We'll skip all of this meaty stuff for a second, keep going with the wood. We have a wonderfully shaped semi-pistol grip stock. That's going to be really helpful for pulling into the shoulder, getting a nice firm seat. We actually have a very low cone because the rifle action itself sits very low. This is very pleasant. If we bring her on back, we'll see we have a steel butt plate. There's no sort of trap. It's not cupped or anything fancy like that. It's just right on the end, but nicely contoured. If I set it alongside the previous K11, it's off, well, to the side of the desk, but if you take a look, I'll push them together. Yeah, there's the butts together, and if I keep on moving it forward, bands are together and the fronts are together. We're basically looking at the same length. I know I'm kind of moving it a bit, but you get the idea. What you'll pay attention to right off the bat, though, is the fact that if I align these receivers just so, it should become apparent that we have a fair bit of savings on that action length. And the rear sight, like I said earlier, has been moved back to sit further back on that chamber area. Again, better sight radius. But otherwise, they're distinctly related guns in many ways, although there's lots of little manufacturing differences. So let's keep going into what makes this the new rifle. Now, of course, it is a straight pull, just like the previous model. Easier done from the shoulder than on the desktop, but you get the idea. Comes straight back. The follower rises to prevent me from going forward, unless it's depressed by a cartridge, or in this case, my hand. As we come all the way forward, we're almost in battery, and then that's the final stroke. We'll see that better in a moment. If we pull the trigger, it's going to drop our firing pin, which is also the safety. Boom. It's a cock on open action, so if I were to go ahead and push this back, you'll see, yeah, she's coming on back. And then she's going to be at full cock right when we clear there. And then there's just very little movement when I close that up. So cock on open. For the safety, we pull back on this pin, and it's actually at that moment, you can go ahead and see the lug that interacts directly on the sear inside that firing group. And so that's the little guy that's keeping this from going forward when I let it go. If we take this and rotate it, it will turn into a channel, which will prevent it from being able to go all the way forward. And therefore, the firing pin can never reach the cartridge unless we manually recock the action, which is much easier to do, not when it's sitting flat on the desk like this. Let's just get a better look at that again. I will pull and turn. There's our lug. It goes into a separate channel, can no longer reach the primer for the next cartridge, and therefore the gun is completely safe until we manually recock and place that in the correct track in order for the sear to allow it to release when we pull the trigger. It's a wonderfully light trigger. Also, so you just want to see it from the top, you can see that we cock on open. There it goes back. And then that last little bit is actually where all our rotation is. So watch the serial numbers reappear. There we go. There's our rotation. If we bring her on back, we'll see that this is our feed path with our follower rising to stop the bolt at that moment. That's when it's going to want to take another charger, which is actually a 6-round cardboard creation with 10 tabs at the end. This will hold, again, 6 cartridges. Put it in there. Thumb them in and then flick back, and she's off and you are running when you bolt forward. Just like the previous K11, the magazine is detachable, although it is very different in construction. The follower has just been pressed out. It's no longer a milled assembly, and it's riveted to a nice little accordion style flat spring instead of that coiled wire spring that was in our prior lesson on the K11. The magazine body itself has now been pressed into shape, mostly welded where it needs to be and ground off, instead of being all lipped together like the K11. This is actually faster and more seamless, less likely to get stuff built up into the cracks and develop rust or other problems and failings. It's stronger and easier. Now with our bolt back, we can press down on this lever, which you can see lets us pull that guy right on out. With the bolt out of the rifle, we can't really do much unless we pull the firing pin out and rotate it into sort of a neutral position. This takes pressure off the system, allows us to go into the sort of battery position by sliding our rod forward. And then at that point, it's pretty much free to escape the front, and boom, we're in business. So this guy comes out. Oh, small note, this has been switched to metal on our actual handle rather than bakelite from the previous, probably stronger. And then instead of having to unscrew like we did with the previous Schmidt style rifles, we just have to find the right spot because it's bayonet fitted, which means it's just sort of a symmetrical lug. Let me see if you guys can see. Two little lugs that turn into the recess that is placed in this shroud. Now, this is actually a separate component, so if I lift up and away, we see, oh, this is the true core of the bolt, the actual bolt head with the extractor, and then you can see where our firing pin would protrude, and this is a groove cut for the ejector to rise up into in order to eject our cartridge. Now the bolt heads fit so well into the bolt body that's practically a bearing. When you want to take this apart, make sure you are rotating the inner component in order to undo those lugs. There's our actual walking lugs, by the way. This just supports the case head and rests very firmly on a shelf inside of there. Now to further disassemble the bolt, you'd want to make sure that you have some pressure taken off there because you're going to want to retain this spring and slip off the actual firing pin, which is a separate and replaceable component, making these very easy to service. There's our firing pin spring, and then the back half of our striker assembly just comes on out the back of the shroud. A fairly complicated part, but one that provides a number of pathways for everything to work the way it should while also supporting our charging handle at the rear. Now, this is, again, our safety component. This would have been attached there with that spring. You can see very, very simple in design, and yet we get a lot of functionality out of it. Now, if we put everything back together on the table, we'll see that the bolt itself, despite the fact that it is a linear action turned into camming, rotating action straight pull bolt, there's really not that many bits involved in keeping this gun running, and all of them can be removed, cleaned, and replaced without any specialty tools or tools of any sort. I did it with just my bare hands. This is something that, for an educated soldier, is very easy to tackle, and there isn't really a way to put it back together wrong. We just do it in the reverse of what I had already done. Now, the last thing to talk about is the very heavily redesigned trigger, which was designed for an 800 gram or 1.8 pound pull. It's a two-stage, but supposed to be consistent across the take-up and the pull. It's a fairly complicated little assembly in there, and yeah, I'd like to pull it out, but to be honest with you, we have a better way of seeing this. Now, thankfully, our friend Bruno did fully disassemble this rifle and rendered all of its fiddly bits into a handy animation for us to enjoy. So let's go ahead and get a look at that.
This is going to be another one of those firearms that looks complex, but is in actuality quite simple to understand. To start off, we will have to open up our action. This requires pulling straight back on the charging handle. Now we can insert our cardboard charger, preloaded with 6 cartridges. Thumbing the rounds into the magazine presses the follower onto its simple flat spring. This keeps pressure upwards into the path of the closing bolt. The handle, by the way, is made up of both the grasping drum and a flat metal forward extension. This is shaped to stabilize the handle as it is pushed and pulled by riding in the receiver. It also interacts with several components, most importantly, the bolt body. At the moment, it's locked, meaning the pair of symmetrical front locking lugs have been turned into matching channels in the receiver. A lug off the left side of the charging handle extension passes through a cam path in the bolt body. This path is shaped to cause the bolt body to rotate as the charging handle is pulled. This unlocks the bolt. At its rearmost position, the charging handle extension snags on the bolt stop. This teeter-totter-like lever is powered by its own spring, keeping the rear upwards, where it catches in a notch on the charging handle, preventing us from yanking the bolt out of the action. Shoving back forward, we can see the charging handle extension drive the bolt body forward and rotate it into lock. Inside the bolt body is the firing pin, which is actually made up of 2 pieces for easy repair and replacement. Behind the head of the firing pin is a coil spring wrapped around its body. The rear of the spring is retained by the cocking shroud. This makes up the rear of the bolt assembly and does not rotate. The charging handle extension's camming lug doesn't just influence the bolt body. It also passes through the interior, non-rotating bolt head reaching the firing pin's head. Withdrawing the charging handle also withdraws the firing pin, even before the bolt body unlocks. Take note of this extension at the lower rear of the firing pin. As we bolt forward, it snags on the raised sear. This keeps it rearward, ready to be dropped by a pull of the trigger, which is probably the most complex system in this rifle. This is the actual trigger, the thing you pull. It's attached to the vertical sear, which in turn keeps the firing pin cocked. The sear has a lug on its left side, which bears against a mousetrap-like torsion spring. This spring keeps the sear in the raised position. Now, understanding how the sear drops is a bit strange. There is not one, but two rotation points. The obvious one is this supporting lever. The less obvious is this lower pin, which the trigger wraps around. Pulling the trigger draws on the sear, and its supporting lever keeps this travel nearly vertical, which releases the firing pin to fall. By the way, the safety for this rifle is simple. Just retract the firing pin and turn it clockwise before releasing. This places the sear lug in a shorter channel in the cocking shroud, never allowing the pin to reach the primer. Just pull and rotate back to rest it on the sear again. Returning to the trigger, I'll point out the two lobes at its rear. These provide a two-stage trigger pull. This is easier to understand if we can see a bit of the receiver, so we'll add that in now. When we first pull the trigger, it pivots on the taller lobe. This is smooth, light, and easy. Once the second lobe reaches the receiver, resistance on the trigger increases. This creates a distinct plateau sensation. Continuing to pull requires a bit more strength, ultimately releasing the firing pin, hence 2 stages. Once again, nested in the bolt body is the actual bolt head. Attached to this is a simple flat spring extractor, which, like the bolt head, does not rotate. As we open the action, the extractor claw drags the spent casing along. Lying in wait is the ejector, a vertical block driven upward by the other half of the trigger spring. With the bolt heading rearward, the ejector finds a set of grooves in both the bolt body and the bolt head, rising to strike the rear of the casing, flicking it from the action. Now, just because we didn't see it much, let's get a look at that bolt body hidden away inside as we fire our last round. With their magazine empty, the follower rises high enough to block the bolt body from being fed forward again, signaling it would be time to reload.
Absolutely beautiful, but let's not stop there. I know we're limited by the classroom, so I went ahead and arranged for our teaching assistant to get out and take some shots with the K31 so that you guys can get a look at the gun in action. It appears to be smooth. Being a neutral nation, Switzerland wasn't eager to attempt a sudden and sweeping rearmament program. Because of their system of mandatory conscription, all able-bodied men would serve as they came into adulthood. So a plan was made to swap over to a standard short rifle as fast as possible while not increasing the annual rate of production. Those who were currently enlisted, who were issued the K11, simply held on to it. These roles didn't need the long rifle accuracy just yet, and probably wouldn't in the future. Recruits would get the new K-31s, though initially it was just the Fusilier and Rifle companies, as well as a special provision for the mountain infantry. Available reserves of K-11 would be enough for everyone else until the K-31s became more numerous. It also helped that the cost to refurbish an existing K-11 was about 1/3 the cost of a new K-31. Even before full production began, serial ranges were set aside for specific official use. This had also been the policy with the prior rifles and carbines. These can be a bit detailed and tedious to explore today. I will say, however, it's worth noting that mass production was assigned a range from 520,151 to 999,999. In the mid-1950s, K-31 production serials returned to the number after the last of the K-11 carbines, and they carried on until 263,330, though private production would carry on further. The first delivery of K-31s would arrive in 1933, a second larger batch in 1934. During that year, the firing pin was lightened and thinned up. This change was also done retroactively, presumably to speed up lock time. In 1935, the receiver steel was hardened up, and the next year so was the magazine body. In 1937, the bolt operating rod changed. My example here is actually the later pattern. This later example is of simpler stamped construction versus the original milled part, which was left in the white. Annual production hovered loosely between 11,000 and 16,000 units all the way up until 1939. Then the outbreak of World War II seems to have sparked some concern in Switzerland. That same year, the army was mobilized just in case of invasion, and of course, to make the country seem as indigestible as possible given the circumstances. 430,000 combat troops and 210,000 support were ready by September. At peak, 850,000 soldiers were called up. Now, while there were German plans for the invasion of Switzerland, these were never appetizing enough to offset the potential costs. The Swiss government also managed to navigate the conflict politically and economically such that they remained neutral. However, they were affected by shortages of materials such as walnut gunstock wood, so several patterns of splice stock were approved for construction. These could be a toothed forend or a lightning bolt-shaped cut behind the wrist, or one of several other patterns. The point being, a smaller block of wood didn't go to waste, and with gluing and splicing, the gun remained just as strong as ever. Further shortages resulted in attempts to replace the chrome-nickel steel of certain parts of the rifle with chrome molybdenum. This was considered a failure, and the decision was reversed. Even after the war, shortages meant that in 1946, authorization was given to use beechwood for stock production. Many of these were later returned to walnut after 1949, however. Now, just to be clear, a sub-series of telescopic-sighted production models were worked up during the 1940s. These used a periscope flip-up sight, initially a 1.8 by 9 and later 2.8 by 14. They are, however, beyond our scope for today. Trials from about 1944 through 1946 did prove that a modified bolt with a stronger firing pin spring and shorter travel of said pin reduced lock time further and significantly affected accuracy, especially at longer ranges. These features were not used on standard production, but did find their way into the 1955 reintroduction of a scoped straight-pull rifle. This, however, took on a specialty role separate from the K-31, which would finally be displaced by the STG-57 autoloading rifle, leading to military production of the bolt-action rifle ending in June of 1958. Total Marshall contracts exceeded some 530,000 units. The best source I could lay hands on adds up as seen here, though I've seen various quotes near the same number. Civilian production, however, carried on until the 1970s, with at least one example produced as late as 1991, though I believe this was a commemorative act. With the STG-57 in service, just like how the K-31 was introduced, it was slowly replaced by production of the new rifle with recruits. As the old soldiers retired out, so did their rifles. This means the venerable bolt action remained in service into the 1970s and even somewhat beyond in specialty roles. While I'm aware that many of you are military historians with particular interest in the drama and intensity that comes with combat, the K-31, however, was a rifle of peace, each a sharpened quill of Swiss porcupine neutrality. And in that regard, I have to praise the rifle. Despite its lack of combat, or perhaps especially because of it, we can see it did the job that was intended. This rifle, along with other Swiss armaments and planning, kept the nation from falling prey to stronger powers when a global conflict was fought right along their borders. As for Adolf Fuhrer, the man we call the father of the K-31, he went on to develop an automatic cannon in 1933, a 1941 24mm tank gun, which was later adapted for infantry use, and that same year, a submachine gun. All of these, by the way, you will be surprised to hear used the toggle lock system. That SMG would actually become a sore point as Fuhrer used his connections to ice out the competition from SIG. His design was adopted but turned out to be unreliable and complicated. This ultimately hurt his reputation. Even so, it seems he rose to the rank of Oberst Brigadier. This was before retiring from the service after World War II had ended. He passed away in 1958. Alright, now you know everything that I do about the famed K-31, which only means we need an opinion from our markswoman May to wrap this whole story up. Alright class, we have our TA May.
Hi.
Did our shooting for us earlier in the video.
I did.
And of course we have the K-31. May, let's get your opinion on actually handling and shooting this rifle, because it's not like we can hand it out to all of you and let you try it here in the classroom. So let's go ahead and pick this guy up.
Oh, sure.
And walk us through the ergonomics and your first impressions of the rifle.
Well, we obviously have a short rifle, not long rifle in length, yet not carbine, but just right, short rifle. We have a good semi-pistol grip, which actually has a very unique shape to it that I'm a fan of. It's got a little hook to it that makes it easier to pull tight into the shoulder.
Sure.
Length of pull on it is actually pretty decent for me, but might be bad for you.
It's a little short for me.
Yeah. And then balance-wise, we're just ahead of the magwell in this one, which I tend to prefer them right here at the magwell in general, but it's still pretty good balance, I would say. Very dense feeling in general, though, I will say.
Yeah, that is probably in part because it has a wide stock, and compared to the prior rifle, it has a heavier barrel and more
Prior
barrel.
rifle? What is this?
We'll get there in a moment.
Okay.
So what else we got?
Very obviously, this is not like my normal bolt action. This is a straight pull.
Right.
Which means I am pulling this straight into my shoulder, so that means I'm operating this from my shoulder in and of itself.
For the demonstration purposes in our classroom and out in the field, we do it from a standing position, which is not how most of these rifles would have been shot, but a standing position means it's the worst balanced, most exhausting position.
Correct.
It also allows you to see the most of the rifle. And then May likes to demonstrate loading and things from the hip where you kind of get a camera angle over top of it. We don't have a full movie budget to make, all the tight shots of being in a perfect position with uniform and everything else. And even if we did, we wouldn't have original ammo, so we shoot at a shorter range.
Correct.
And the split is not so much like her groupings are not an expression of the precision of the rifle. It's actually an expression of the ergonomics of the rifle in the worst possible handling position.
True.
This is very detached from the reality of a military force where you'd be embedded and shoot very carefully. But we're also presenting this as a classroom, and we're really trying to compare apples to apples of bolt action rifles and other things like that.
And the best way to do that is uniform across the board, so everything is getting kind of shot the same way.
Uniform in the worst possible way, because that shows the most flaws.
Got it.
Yes. So if we shot them all the best possible way, you'd start to see, well, it adds up to very small differences.
Correct. And so, very mumuch like the Swiss, by the way, I want to point out everything on here looks very well done, like very polished, very fine in terms of the features, the little tiny, just little ornate bits that are hanging off it too. Like this bolt right here, normally I'm used to just a little bulb sticking off the side. No, it's a nice little barrel shape.
Yeah, it's several pressed together pieces, although it's not necessarily ornate. Those are actually very, very simple probably stampings that were fitted onto another stamping to make it much easier to produce. So I wouldn't say ornate. They're actually quite the opposite. They're very utilitarian. It's just that they've been done in a very nice way.
Yeah, I guess they just feel very finished, I guess.
There is something to be said. We talked about this with Kichiro Nambu, who designed the Type 38 Japanese rifle, that one of his principles is that the rifle must be beautiful so that the soldiers are inspired to take care of it. And I suspect that's why we see something like this as a very elegant rifle despite being utilitarian, because by reducing the number of surfaces that can possibly grime up and also making the rifle look tidy, it makes it easier for you to see that the rifle is tidy. And therefore, if there's rust or other problems, boom, the eye is drawn right to it.
Correct, I could see that. The sight picture, we're just looking at a U-notch rear with it's not really a post up front there, but it's kind of similar to one in terms of its structure, isn't it?
It's a squared up front sight.
Yeah, but it's protected as well, which is very nice. But it's a good read, very clean read. I do like that. I'm trying to think what else to really talk about in just terms of general features. Our safety is one that we have encountered before, where it's pull out and rotate style. So nothing
that comes over from the prior rifle. Would
Correct.
you say that it's a particularly efficient safety?
I don't think efficient is the word I would
Mechanically,
use.
yes, but as the shooter.
No, it's a little bit awkward as the shooter.
Because my problem with that safety is if you're in the safe position and you go to fire, oh God, you got to really get on the rifle versus just being like, click, and then firing. So, what's your opinion on it?
I truly do think that it's not the most, not the fastest safety to use. At the very least, as a shooter, it's a very positive position you drop into. Like, there's no questioning that. And if you do miss it visually and then auditorially, you are going to be able to tell it's off.
Yes. This reminds me of safety by doctrine, which is almost like having no safety at all. Like, say, the French, where they just don't put one in the chamber unless it's time to fire the rifle. Okay, yes, we do have a recocking and safety option here, but at the expense of having to get the other hand involved or completely remove the hand from the rifle.
Right. But aside from that, ergonomics-wise, I think that pretty much covers everything on the piece in and of itself.
Okay. In terms of handling, we have to load it up with our 6-round cardboard charger.
Handy-dandy charger.
How is that?
Surprisingly smooth. I thought for sure maybe it would take a second to kind of set it in there, but no, it sets itself into the mouth essentially very well. And then charging the rounds into the actual magazine went very quickly, very smooth, no snags there. And then the only thing I wasn't expecting to go quite as well as it did was the flick out that our buddy Bloke on the range had told us to do, where I just flicked my thumb and it really just popped the charger right there out of the gun, which was fantastic. It went very smoothly.
All right, so we've loaded it up and you've got to work that bolt back and forth. How's that going for you?
Generally, I tend to operate most of the rifles that we handle for this at my waist. And it typically is just for a safety reason that I'll be doing that.
Yes, we're often using borrowed equipment, hand-loaded ammo, things like that.
Correct.
And what we want to do is we want to see each case as it comes out. So dropping the rifle slows the rhythm. It lets the camera see what's happening, more so than if it's in the shouldered position.
Correct.
And then also, off camera, we can kind of see the brass and see if there's any undue smoke coming from the chamber area or any other weirdness.
It's been a lot easier to keep that as the standard form, but this being a straight pull operating from the shoulder
is required.
Yeah, it actually is.
Because
yes.
if
Otherwise,
you try to
the
work
case
that from
will
the hip,
pop it up and smack you in the face.
Well, it's more than that, though. If it's just trying to pull the rifle apart in two directions because all the tension is in the linear pull.
Yeah, pretend you're trying to operate a bow from your hip. Doesn't really work out. You really want to get the strength of your shoulders and your back into it, especially your back.
Now, bolt action, strangely easier to work from the hip in a lot of ways, although less efficient militarily, obviously. But when you're dropping that rifle, you can just let the weight of the rifle kind of help in opening the bolt. And it's just sort of a boop and go,
Right.
Not so in this case.
Correct. So this one, I will say, normally there's been several bolt actions we've operated in the past, straight pulls in the past, that it felt like it was just, they weren't smooth, or there was a lot of thrusting required into it, that it was just coming off of my shoulder a lot, which was very uncomfortable.
Notorious amongst these would be the Mannlicher 1890-95 family.
Correct.
So even the older wedge-locking, 86 family.
So stiff.
The 86 family, yeah, but they weren't as bad as the later 1895 rotating bolts, because by design, the 1885 actually has tension you have to overcome in both directions.
Correct.
Especially in that opening stroke. There's a lot of and then you're snapping open, and you hit this force at the rear, and you kind of vibrate, and you go forward again. And it's a lot.
Correct.
Alternatively, probably the best shooting rifle we've had so far in straight pull world was, I believe, the Ross Mark III.
Oh yes, the Mark III was fantastic.
That is a very smooth gun back and forth.
I believe you've handled a Mark II that you were quite fond of back in the day.
Yes, we have not done that in our classroom yet, but I have handled Ross Mark IIs, and there's a particularly fine one I've handled that was extremely smooth. I will say, however, it was so smooth that it kind of got to the point of not being able to feel the start and stop points or to consciously pick up on when it locks into battery. And there is
I could see
something
that.
very reassuring about feeling that moment. Does that gun actually, I tell you what, does that lock into battery in a way that you can feel it?
Oh, yes, it's the last part of the travel here. I'll actually demonstrate for a second here. So the very last part, it's not all the way in battery yet. That last little section right there. And it definitely comes to a positive halt before it, too. You can hear it, you can feel it. Kinesthetically, very nice. It's a pleasure, I would say.
That feels very safe to the soldier's mind. I know it doesn't really mean much, but it is something that communicates a level of trust, I think.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I actually do enjoy it. I found this one very smooth, too, to operate. I didn't really feel it coming off my shoulder too much when I was operating. It felt very nice.
Now, compared to the Mannlicher 1895.
Oh, yeah, I would take this one all day.
Much smoother?
Yes, absolutely.
Compared to the Ross Mark III.
Well, that gets into a little difficult of a territory because it was kind of smooth, but I still think I might take this one over that.
I will say so this is the thing that we can't really prove without going through a whole series of tests, but my suggestion would be that I suspect in bad conditions, the Ross, which has the internal helical assembly like a Mannlicher, is going to suffer quicker from rust, fouling, dirt, whatever. This system has a very wide open, singular camming opening with a rod through it. It's likely to just go ahead and the dirt, and it's more likely that this is going to remain consistent in bad conditions.
Correct.
Bad conditions than the Ross.
I would agree.
Now, it's kind of a fine point, but can you drop the magazine out of that rifle?
I mean, I can certainly try.
Should just be a button. Okay. Let me have that here. We'll throw it on the ground. Will you just work that bolt like 1 or 2 times?
Okay.
From the shoulder. Okay. Do you notice any appreciable difference between that and the previous rifle, the K11? Because that really is the gun that this one is based off of.
I can't say I feel that much of a difference, actually. If anything, that one's slightly...
Heavier?
No, if anything, that one's slightly smoother, if anything.
Oh, okay.
That's probably about it.
Well, that's good. You'd want it to be slightly better. Probably just because there's less length and mass in the bolt.
Maybe that's it, yeah.
But, yeah, they're actually quite comparable because it's the same camming operation overall. Just because we've shortened the receiver and the bolt doesn't mean that we've got a lighter configuration. So, in other words, they've kept everything about static with the previous rifle in terms of that portion of the handling. All right, now this is where we get into some difference.
Oh.
Because we've now loaded the gun, worked the action. You're going to pull the trigger.
Oh, man.
So let's talk about that trigger. What have we got?
Well, it's actually a very smooth 2-stage trigger because the first take, there is a fair bit of take up, don't get me wrong, but there's barely any weight to it. It feels very clean. And then the second part, it's not really a touch off, but it doesn't feel like there's more than 2 pounds to that little second stage
it's
to it.
1.8 or something like that.
Okay, well then, yeah, that makes total sense.
You know what? I don't remember now. We had it earlier in our lesson. I'm sorry. Check your notes.
It was incredibly light. There wasn't much transition there. It was beautiful, actually.
Yeah, this is probably the nicest standard issue military trigger that you're going to find. And we saw it earlier in our film demonstration from Bruno. There is a reason why. They've designed the trigger in such a way as to take up that stack and deliver it very evenly. Now, there's other ways to do this, but they're more expensive. And so this is sort of splitting the difference between economy and good consistency of pull. It's really a fantastic design, I think.
Oh, yeah, it was wonderful.
It's definitely, to me, very noticeable from the K11. Could you tell the difference?
The K11 had a frankly lovely trigger. It really did. The second stage, though, I will say, is not quite as clean or light as the K31's is, though.
Right. And that could be a difference of individual rifles, but I will say, engineering-wise, there should be an improvement there.
I mean, I definitely felt one.
Yeah. All right, so
After that's just recoil, I guess?
Yeah, I was going to say, it's gone bang.
Yeah.
Where are we at on recoil?
It's kind of... It makes me think of, honestly, a Springfield 1903. Like, it's 30-06.
It's that aggressive.
Well, here's the thing. It's kind of like a Springfield 1903, but it's like a chubbier version of that, I would say.
So the Enfield 1917?
Somewhere in between.
Okay,
I
so
think
it's
it's somewhere
not...
in between those two. That's what my opinion would
Both
be.
of these would be rifles chambered for 30-06, both of them in American service.
Because I think the rounds are pretty comparable.
They are. Actually, I can put that up right now. If you take a look at the note, you'll see this is your 7.5 Swiss cartridge, and then we'll just go ahead and overlay 30-06. And performance-wise, they're fairly close in a lot of ways.
Okay.
At least
that does make sense why I would think Springfield 1903-ish round.
right. However, I would say to my shoulder, this feels much nicer than a Springfield 1903's recoil.
It does, yes.
Not nearly as good as the Enfield 1917, which is just a log. I mean, that gun is heavy and it
really
eats up
is.
recoil.
It does.
But still,
It's still pretty good.
What would
It's
you
moderate.
say? Controllable,
Controllably
comfortable?
moderate. Let's
Is it
go with
beating
that.
you up?
No, it's not beating me up. The only
Okay.
thing that actually, if anything, holding up the weight all day will take out more of me than the recoil,
The recoil
will.
itself. That's fair. I mean, and
saying
again,
something.
normally you wouldn't be standing with it like that.
No.
So, where does that leave us? Any final thoughts on the rifle as a whole?
I'm happy to see just what became essentially a more polished version of the K11, which I thoroughly enjoyed the K11. I had a great time with it.
Yeah, I was about to say, if you were a soldier that was issued that rifle from having had this one before, would you notice it was a different gun right away?
The only thing that would stand out, obviously, is the shape of the receiver section. That is so long and bulky by comparison to this one.
Yeah.
But that's if I remembered it.
The tell is the magazine gap, really. You know, just that all that stuff being shunted forward.
For me, no, the tell is the top right here, just having this whole section enclosed back here. Meanwhile, it's all open and exposed on this one because they brought the actual everything back.
In terms of balance, they're actually very similar because despite moving all this back, they also used a heavier barrel profile on that one.
Correct, they did.
So you're getting more precision out of that rifle than you are out of this, well, short rifle carbine. So, but
No, good. Yeah, that was a good one. Good retort.
I mean, I think you got to understand in context, that gun is supposed to be this gun, but with the performance of the rifle. What do you think they pulled it off?
I mean, I think they did. It definitely is an improved version of the K11.
Yeah, it definitely feels like it is a K11, but more.
Yeah.
You know, just better.
I'm getting more out of it.
Yeah. So in that regard, I think they hit all of their points. I mean, it's a very strong achievement for what was their original design goal.
I would agree.
Yeah, I quite like it.
Would shoot again.
All right. I believe that wraps up our lesson for our K31. So, for those of you who are students in our classroom, go ahead and check your inboxes in the next couple of days. You should be getting your study guide for this lesson. There may be a quiz, so always make sure to reread every once in a while. For those of you who are auditing at home, because we do have a camera in the classroom, if you would like to have those same study guides and things like that, make sure you support the school and the network over at Patreon or Subscribestar. That's how we're able to make this and then give it to all of you for free.
Yes.
Most people who are attending this class at the moment are doing so remotely at zero cost. And we'd like to keep that happening, so those of you who can, please do.
Please and thank you, yes.
All right, well, I think that wraps up our lesson for today. And so, with the sound of the bell, y'all can get on out of here.
Thanks for joining us.
Have a good one. For you auditing for free at home, this class is almost exclusively funded by viewers much like yourself. Please consider joining us on Patreon or Subscribestar for access to our Office Hours podcast and additional course materials. Special support for this lesson was provided by our executive producers, Andy Wade and Anthony. Please give them your thanks along with ours. All right, y'all, have a good one.